All right. Okay, we're live. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jacob McGill, and I'm the founder of the 100-Year Plan. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is a bit of an experiment. It's a foundational piece of the work that I do and the way that I support people to improve their health span. And that's what the 100-Year Plan is all about. It's about the most important question, in my opinion, which is how long is your quality of life? Now, I was actually explaining this to somebody yesterday. This was first brought to my attention in two different conversations. I heard it from a biomolecular chemist by the name of Stephen Chernisky, and I heard it from a double PhD geneticist, Dr. Aubrey de Grey. And although they said it in slightly different ways, the thing that they said was essentially that our DNA is designed to live to around 120 without any real health challenges. And so that got me thinking. And I started processing, working on it a little bit. And I just kind of got into this position where it's like, well, what does that actually mean? And so one of the things that kind of came clear to me after I did some research and asked a lot of questions to a lot of different people is that we're told that there are these diseases of aging. And that isn't the case. What they are is they're diseases of degradation. So what degrades us? Well, it happens to be trauma, toxicity, and tension. Those are the three things that wear away at our edges. And one of the things Dr. Aubrey de Grey said was, you can't do much to lengthen. I think they're called the telomeres, the parts of your genetic pattern that say, this is your expiry date. He said, you can't do much to lengthen them, but you need to pay attention to what you do that shortens them. And so this is kind of how the 100-Year Plan was built, is one triangle at a time. In this case, the trauma, toxicity, and tension triangle. And so what's happened over the last 2 decades plus that I've been doing this work and just deep diving and learning everything that I can about health and well-being is essentially I've kept on looking, and any problem that I came up with, I kept digging for facts. Now, as a clinician, as somebody who has a clinical rehab practice, it's worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, and very fortunately in my apprenticeships, especially, I had the opportunity to work with thousands of clients just because some of the places that I was were high volume places. One of the Pilates studios I worked at was 14 reformers. And so every hour there were more clients coming in. This place had been open for 30 years when I started there. So it gave me a lot of exposure, a lot of data, a lot of variety, a lot of information to work with. And that deepened my understanding. And again, every time I came across something, especially when I was in the lab with the 6 years that I ran my practice inside of a clinic, before I moved it onto Zoom about 10 years ago, I was confronted as like, how do I solve this problem? What do I do with this thing? And I just kept on making triangles. And the cool thing about a triangle is if you have a point, you can break the face off and stick it on that point and find leverage, right? And that's what a fulcrum is. It's the lever and the leverage piece. I don't even know the proper name for this piece, but the place where you get extra leverage, not just from the length of the lever. And so this opened up my mind, and I kept on making triangles, and to date, there are 56 of them. And so these triangles are part of the process. They are the foundation of the 100-Year Plan. And then a few years ago, I was super fortunate to be in the company of some brilliant people who created a curriculum called The Most Important Conversations. And they were doing mainly the inner game work, right? Do the work up here. And I've always been a do the work down here kind of person. And that's another triangle that we'll talk about. how many nerves are here, how many nerves are here, and then how many nerves are in our little thinky brain called the neocortex. And it's a lot, a little, and almost nothing, to be honest, but that's another triangle. And so I just kept on making these triangles, and they solved every problem I've been able to come across in terms of health and well-being. And then the TMIC methodology was just a really intelligent way of walking people through it. So what I'm telling you about is that the most important conversations exists. It's bigger than me, and it's a super valuable space. And just so you can discern, although I'm going to be going through a different triangle every single week, or I don't know, until I get bored, there's enough to do 56 weeks really. On the way there, you need to understand that these are not the most important conversations. So I'm doing the presentation part of it, and then the conversation side of it, and I'm going to remind you every single week, is where we engage in a dialogue. That's a different time, that's a different day, and you actually need to be vetted to be a part of that group, because you have to want to be there. You have to want to dig in till you hit the bottom of the hole, because that's what makes the work work, right? It's actually the process. And that's the difference between like consuming content, which you are right now, and thank you for doing this, but between consuming content and creating a conversation, creating a dialogue. So the format here is going to be like 20 or 30 minutes of presentation, and then where it should go if we were in a conversational space together is to spend the next 60 to 90 minutes just uncovering everything. Because you're meant to dig, you're meant to explore, and you're meant to sweat. You're meant to go into uncomfortable places and go home, do some homework, and come back. And that's what really makes it progress. So the labeling is there, the branding is there, but the delivery isn't complete. I just want to be super transparent about that with everyone as we move forward. So I thought I'd begin at the beginning today and start with one of my favorite triangles. And I just call it the triangle of existence. Now, normally we do one corner of a triangle every week for 3 weeks, so we can just like really unpack it. But for me, this triangle of existence, of the elements of our existence, is air, water, and food. Now, that might not seem like much, and it might not be that interesting, but when you start to dig into it, some curious things start to happen. So let's start with air. Now, why would we want to start with air? First off, and it depends which one of these you've memorized. There's more than one, but you can live 3 minutes or so without breathing. So that makes air kind of important. Whereas you can live apparently like 3 days without any water. And then, you know, some of us may be longer than others, but to keep the threes going, you can live 3 weeks without food. Now, these aren't going to be comfortable minutes. They're not going to be comfortable days. They're not going to be comfortable weeks. But in terms of priorities, in terms of what this organism needs, not to survive, but to not die, that order of precedence is incredibly clear. Air beats water, beats food. It's really that simple. But what else is there to understand about air? I got this from one of my Pilates teachers, and she's one of the best people at understanding the parts of things and explaining them and demonstrating that they're actually important to know that I've ever met. I just thought she was incredibly brilliant. And so what she taught me is that we have 21 breathing muscles, okay, respiratory muscles. So when I take an inhalation, and I mean a real breath, not a slouch behind the laptop breath, not a falling into the couch breath, but an actual inhalation, I'm firing 21 muscles. Now, out of those 21 muscles, only one of those muscles is not a postural muscle. And that's the diaphragm. So the diaphragm sits inside this tube of the rib cage and kind of pulls up and down. We won't go too deep into anatomy and that kind of stuff today, but one of the cool things about it that is actually quite interesting in terms of the diaphragm is the way that it resets or pulls itself into place is actually in an inhalation process. Okay, that's it snapping back into place. It's kind of like a reverse trampoline. And so if we exhale really well, squeeze all that air out, the diaphragm wants to move back and pull air in. Now, it doesn't mean you can't inhale further and, even yogically and other ways, like press down on those organs and cause some good things to happen. But that's its job and that's what it does. And it's the only muscle, again, out of all 21 that isn't directly related to posture. It's more of like an organ muscle, if you want to think of it that way. So all the other respiratory muscles are part of what I think of as a pump. And that's because, between here and here, all these vertebrae, especially the 12 vertebrae with the 12 ribs that the lungs are inside of, they're part of the pump. And it's not just a pump of air, it's a pump of fluid directly in the way that it moves cerebral spinal fluid, but also indirectly because there's blood and there's lymph and there's decompression, compression of those intervertebral spaces, discs. And then also there's movement on or around a bunch of different nerves. So all of this stuff is happening during a full breath in and a full breath out. And so that's one of the powerful things about air is it's, again, not just this thing that we can't live without for the shortest period of time around all three corners of this triangle, but it is in and of itself a mechanism to give life to other parts of the system, other parts of the organism, and like directly correlated to spinal health, cerebrospinal fluid, which affects brain health. And then lo and behold, that diaphragmatic, that interloper, that one outlier muscle that isn't postural, well, that's up and down massaging organs, and that's without movement, right? That's just like static posture and breathing. So air is incredibly important, but also incredibly powerful. It opens a whole bunch of doors for us for functionality. And so it doesn't just take precedence in, again, the one way in terms of survival, but it actually has a massive effect in a bunch of other ways. And that's why it precedes water and food. I mean, think about that organ breathing and how that moves your organs. And where does food go? So some of the stuff starts to make sense in the way that the train cars link up to each other. And that's my favorite thing about the triangles is I use them to just make sense of things for myself first, just so I could learn this stuff. And then it ended up being very helpful in terms of helping other people because it told me where to look and how to, again, find leverage in terms of resolving things. So moving on from air is water. Now, I actually did a whole research piece on this, and I don't have it in front of me right now. I bring it out for the water triangle. But thanks to the internet and somebody else's hard work, there's a full list of all the different parts of the body and what percentage water they are. And I don't remember all of them. I know the eye has a lot of water in it. The lungs are something like 80% water. And then if you go all the way down to the smallest amounts, even our bones are still at least 20% water. So again, when we go back to that idea that things that age us are because they degrade us because of trauma, toxicity, or tension, right? There's different things that we can put in our body that cause dehydration, and that can affect the whole system by pulling water out of it, never mind minerals and other stuff. And again, you should follow people who know way more about the biochemical and nutritional and than I do. All that information is readily available out there. I'm just here to give you some pathways to go down. But again, we can live longer without food than we can without water. So water takes precedence. And of course, like eating and not having any water, like that's going to end badly at some point too, right? Because all of these systems need lubrication. There's like digestion, absorption, assimilation, like all these different things that are food related activities require a certain amount of hydration to function. So water is like a lubricant among other things. And so, this starts to make sense again in several different ways. There's layers to this stuff, but being adequately, appropriately, properly hydrated, you could be overhydrated too. It's important to understand these things and do your due diligence and your research and find the experts who will tell you the right amounts of these things. You got to love, of course, Dr. Huberman for this kind of stuff, because he not only gives you fantastic information, but also protocols. And again, like I don't remember the exact amount. I think it was around a third a cup of water, but he was like, after waking this much, every hour, the first 8 hours is the best way to hydrate. That amount may not be completely accurate, but you can find it in like 15 seconds of search. And again, these are things that you can adopt into your life. Now, why do these things matter? Well, one of the most important pieces is understanding that there are a whole bunch of people, and like fortunately, culture's changed a bit since I first started my practice, but a whole bunch of people who are working on their diet that aren't hydrating properly, right? And I said properly. I didn't say like enough. There is such a thing as too much, but they aren't hydrating properly or appropriately for their body chemistry and their needs. And they certainly aren't breathing properly. And if you're not doing those two things on the triangle first, why do you think that these dietary changes that you're trying to make aren't having the impact that you want? Because the system can't function, because the pump isn't working, because metabolism isn't functioning, absorption, assimilation, digestion, like all these things that happen after mastication and swallowing aren't functional. And so as much work as you're trying to put into the food side of things, if you're not working the whole triangle, then your efforts are going to be diminished or even sabotaged. It really depends. And that's why, having somebody work with you on this stuff who can like monitor exactly what you're doing and understand you is incredibly important and super valuable. But again, the pieces of this triangle should start to make sense. So, getting to food, of course, there are a bunch of different ways to eat. You need to find the right way to eat for you. You need to find the right amount to eat. You need to find the right times to eat. You need to, put this stuff together in a sensible way. And I'm not going to tell you the right way to do it because it is very personal and very individual. I'm just going to say it's going to work a lot better if you breathe well, if you are appropriately hydrated for yourself. I find for myself that the separation of water and food parts of my day or the hour or the time or that kind of stuff, and it's not that I don't allow myself anything while I'm eating, but those aren't hydration times, those are nutrition times. And then like the volume of respiration. And something else to remember about breathing is that it works best with moving. And so that's something else to think about too. I know there's a time and a place for breathing exercises, and like I teach a whole breath workshop, and it's done like, let's learn this breath, let's learn that breath. It's pretty static, it's pretty sitting, but that's just a small portion. That stuff for me is for you when you're like commuting to work, stuck in gridlock, on transit, in a lineup at the grocery store, waiting for your turn to go through the checkout. Those are the right places to take a new breathing exercise that you've learned. Setting a timer at work and using it to break up the desk routine during those times where you're too lazy to get up and move, which you should be doing. Ideally, every 15 minutes or so would be best for you. But all these things have a place in your life. All these things are a part of a practice. And this is kind of the main point of the triangle process and the idea that you can have a conversation through the corners is because when we unpack things into digestible units and address things in ways that are simple and clear, then you can take action. Okay, and that's really what my intention is for you in these most important conversations around health and well-being. So this has been kind of a cursory introduction and a little bit of a simple overview of the air, water, food triangle. And again, like I have my own opinions about diet, nutrition, that kind of stuff. You should too. There's a ton of research information and then like well-founded expertise, people who ask you questions about you before they make suggestions would be the ones that I would kind of start to go with or lean in towards it maybe a little bit and listen to more. But in order of precedence and importance of these things, please understand that breathing is top of the list. And so that'd be my suggestion for you. Like I said earlier, like these things were always about a little bit of homework. And so what I'm going to ask of you is that you do spend a little bit of time thinking, sensing, and feeling, another triangle, your breath, your respiration, right? Use the multi-syllable version so you can think about how drawn out it is. And again, there are numerous ways to breathe. In and out is always my favorite way, but you can in, out, out, out. You can in, nose, out, mouth. There's a world of things, right? I'm sure we could list like 30 to 50 off the top of our heads. The main thing is it full? Are you spending a bit of time each day breathing to your capacity? You know, and it shouldn't set off a coughing attack. It shouldn't set off any spasms, but if it does, it's telling you that you're already a little bit limited. And it's probably a good time for you to look at some mobilization and some stretching and some movement and some activity that you can do to make breath more accessible, because you want all 21 of those muscles to be able to stretch out all the way and then come all the way back together and work their full ranges of motion so they can do the work that they're supposed to do for this pump that we're made of, that adds to our function. So I think I'm going to wrap it up with that today. I want to thank you very much for your time and remind you that I'm just here. If there's anything I can do to help you, reach out, ask me questions. I pride myself in being a hub of resources. And that means that I don't know everything, but I've got a pretty good idea of places to look and who to ask, and that kind of stuff. And that's one of the things that made my clinical practice work all the time, is I wasn't religious about me being the thing that like helped people as much as I like to say a shotgun is a very good approach, right? You just want to come at it as many different ways as you can. And that includes ideally a team of experts and a wealth of information. So if I can point you in the right direction in any way, I'm more than happy to do that. Thank you very much for your time. Breathe, move, and live, and be well.